Yes, we start with the G7 summit in Biarritz, where it's a day of two Donalds for the Prime Minister. First, he'll cement his own personal special relationship with President Trump when the two meet. Top of that agenda will be laying the groundwork for a future trade deal with the US once the UK has left the European Union. A deal which Mr Johnson believes must involve the US lifting restrictions on UK businesses.
Brexit will also feature heavily in the Prime Minister's other crunch meeting today with the EU Council President Donald Tusk. Reports this morning suggest that Mr Johnson will threaten to withhold billions of pounds of payments to the EU if the UK leaves without a deal. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, is in Biarritz and sent this report.
A brand new Prime Minister with a very different style. Boris Johnson clearly enjoying his arrival on the world stage. But there's serious business to be done here too. Mr Johnson will today have face-to-face talks with President Trump as he looks towards a post-Brexit US trade deal. But it might not be smooth sailing. Trouble could be on the horizon. The PM insists the NHS is off the table in any trade negotiation with the US, and Democrats in Washington have vowed to block a trade deal if Brexit is seen to risk peace in Ireland. There are immediate risks too. A no-deal Brexit looms, and the man who speaks for Europe says that will be Mr Johnson's fault.
The EU was always open to cooperation. When David Cameron wanted to avoid Brexit, when Theresa May wanted to avoid a no-deal Brexit, and we will also be ready now to hold serious talks with Prime Minister Johnson. The one thing I will not cooperate on is no deal. And I still hope that Prime Minister Johnson will not like to go down in history as Mr. No Deal.
Mr Johnson will meet Mr Tusk today, and the already rocky relationship could be about to get worse. The PM now telling the EU he's ready to withhold nearly all of the £39 billion divorce bill if there's a no-deal Brexit. Mr Johnson said he thought there was 1,000,000 in 1 chance of the UK leaving with no deal. Those odds are now rapidly shortening. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Biarritz.
Let's talk to our diplomatic editor, Dominic Waghorn, who's in Biarritz for us this morning. In terms of the meeting with President Trump, is it likely that Mr Trump will push back against what the Prime Minister is trying to achieve, or will he play the game here?
Well, I mean, what the Prime Minister has said he's going to be talking to Donald Trump about, amongst other things, is these fears of a global recession arising from a global trade war, an American trade war, with China, and these concerns that all the world leaders have about the President Trump's threats to increase tariffs on China even more than he had threatened to in the past. In the last 48 hours or so, he's really escalated the trade war with the Chinese. That's of concern to world leaders gathering here, and Boris Johnson is going to put that to Donald Trump, he says. But he's likely to find the American president, I think, in a worse mood than yesterday. We saw President Trump looking fairly relaxed here, more relaxed than he often does in the company of world leaders at these kind of events, where he sometimes looks rather aggravated by the whole event. Maybe it's because it's Biarritz, which is a town known for gambling. He's a former casino tycoon, of course. Maybe I think he was more mollified by the French president's approach and his kind of soothing overtures. But his officials and aides have been rather upset about the way the French are focusing on what they've called niche issues. And you might be surprised to hear that one of those niche issues they've referred to is climate change. This morning, he has woken up tweeting this: such false, inaccurate reporting thus far on the G7. The fake news knows this, but they can't help themselves. Leaving now to have breakfast with Boris Johnson. So he's not happy with the media, and he may be in a less happy mood, I think, when he meets Boris Johnson. And I think the difficulty, the challenge for Johnson is he's got to try and confront him on trade without offending him. And I think for him that is more of an acute dilemma, because he's got to keep the president on side as a key ally, particularly after Brexit happens.
And with his meeting with the other Donald today, I guess less pressure on the Prime Minister to keep that Donald on side.
Yeah, I mean, it's the opposite there, isn't it? Yeah, he's meeting a pair of Donalds today, and with Donald Tusk, he's got to convince him he's serious. He's really got to worry Donald Tusk, as he's got to worry the other leaders here, European leaders, because he's trying to inject into the Brexit negotiations an element of jeopardy that Theresa May allegedly simply left out. That is the sense that if Britain doesn't get a change in the withdrawal agreement, doesn't get a better deal from the Europeans, then it is prepared. It's serious about walking away with a no deal. And in his meetings with Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron, he's tried to put the same point across. His point is that the withdrawal agreement has been rejected 3 times, and therefore it's unacceptable for European partners to say that's the only deal on the table, and that it's in everyone's interest to negotiate a better deal. I think that penny is dropping, particularly from his meetings this week, but it seems to, particularly amongst French officials, simply have made them pessimistic and rather depressed and surprised, bewildered really, the British prepared to cut off their nose despite the face, I think is their approach, their kind of view of what the British are threatening to do. So there's a realisation a no deal is increasingly possible. For what we saw yesterday, rhetoric was more about blaming the other side if and more likely when it eventually happens than trying to work out how to avoid it.